Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. Tonight, Fred wanted meatballs for dinner. Luckily, I had some in the freezer. All it takes is to dress them up a little bit. So here we're going to do a video on mushroom and/or onion gravy because you can do it either way, mushrooms, onions, or both. Here are the ingredients. Please feel free to pause, write them down, and hey, if you like our videos, give us a thumbs up. We need you to subscribe and share. So I've been thinking lately about some simple things that folks can learn when they're just starting to cook. That's what this is. Here's a stick of butter. I've got here a cup of mushrooms. I've sliced them. You can chop them if you like, but sliced turns out best, I think. And this is about a half cup, maybe a little bit more, of thinly sliced onions. Now, you can do this with just the mushrooms or just the onions. This is half a cup of flour. I use self-rising. The only difference is I will need less salt. And these are some meatballs I had in the freezer. You know, I double make things pretty often so I can freeze some. And I'll put the link for my meatball recipe in the info. So anyway, I was thinking about simple things that folks can cook. Here's the broth, by the way. This is a quart of broth. I'm using beef. You can use chicken. A lot depends on what you're going to make with it. But I'm having meatballs, so I'm using beef. So in my Grandma Velma's cast iron pan, which is perfect for this, except maybe I should have gotten one a little bit bigger, I'm melting the butter, and I'm going to put my mushrooms, which I've packed in here, and the onions, and we're going to saute those for a little while. We're not going to necessarily cook them done, but we're going to cook them long enough for them to start developing some flavor and to let go of their juices. You know, we had a discussion in the Cooking from Scratch group the other day about what's the difference in a gravy and a sauce, and then a soup too, but mostly a gravy and a sauce. And I always say the difference is how you use it. What we're doing here is making a gravy. We are using the sauce velouté technique. This is just a variation of that. And it's really something that everybody should learn to make, especially folks just starting out. In case you're not familiar with sauce velouté, and you don't have to be. But if you want to know more about it, I have a video. It's one of the 5 French mother sauces, and this is a variation of that. So I'm adding some salt, and I'm using red pepper flakes, as I often do. You can use black pepper if you prefer, and the salt will help the vegetables weep, help them let go of the juices. So I'm fairly generous with the salt here because my broth is not salted. So we're going to stir this around a little bit, and then I've got this on a medium-low heat because I'm using butter. You can use oil, but I just think butter gives a much better flavor. And if you're using butter, you have to keep your heat fairly low because you don't want to scorch it. So this has been, I don't know, about 5 minutes, and I want you to look at the creaminess we're getting there. You won't get that with oil. You get that with butter. And we're going to cook these. I want you to see the onions are getting translucent. The mushrooms are taking on a little color. They're not quite where I want them yet, but it'll be about 10 minutes total. So it's been about 10 minutes. I want to show you the onions. They're getting soft. They're not caramelized. We're not going that far with them, but they're soft. And you can tell by looking at the mushrooms that they're just about done. And this is where we want to be before we take the next step. This was about 10 minutes total. And I just want to show you the creaminess we've got down in there. And this is because we used butter. You know, butter has milk solids in it, and oil doesn't. So I'm adding in my half cup flour, and I'm going to stir. Now we're making a roux. We just left the vegetables in. I'm not going to make this a very dark roux. It would probably work better if you wanted a really dark gravy, which you could do. You would want to take the vegetables out because you have to really brown the roux a long time to make it brown gravy. But I'm leaving this kind of light, and I'm just stirring that flour in, and I'm going to let it simmer just like this, stirring pretty often for 2 to 3 minutes because we want to cook off the raw flour taste. And don't panic if this gets really, really thick. It's okay. It won't lump. I promise. And it's been about 3 or 4 minutes. I've let this brown just a little bit. Not as much as brown gravy. It won't be brown gravy. But I've let it get a little toasty. Gives the flour a little better flavor. And we're going to be adding our broth. So I add the broth. It's cold broth. You always use cold broth, cold liquid with a hot roux. And I added, that was probably about a half cup. And you stir, stir, stir. Anytime you're making a sauce or gravy, you want to add the liquid a little bit at a time. And yes, it's getting very, very thick. That's okay. It'll thin out, and as long as you have a cold broth and a hot roux, you are not going to get lumps. They'll stir right out. Just like this. I have most of the broth in, not all of it. I may actually not put it all in right now, but you see how that just creams up. The flour does not make a lump when you do it this way. It'll just stir right out. See that velvety consistency we're getting? This is almost all of the broth. So is it gravy or is it sauce? Doesn't matter, does it? It's going to be yummy. You know, my grandson called from the army the other day, and he's wanting to start cooking. And my son, his dad, always used to say, you know, when you leave home, you need to have one complete meal that you master, and then you'll always be able to entertain or to feed yourself. See this nice consistency we've got here? It's going to thicken up a little bit, but there are no lumps in this, and this is basically your gravy. It's going to thicken some though. So anyway, back to my story about my grandson. This is one of the things that I think someone just starting out really should learn to cook. Whether you're using this video or whether your mom teaches it to you, you know, this is a good thing for you to have in your repertoire. You can make so many things out of it. I'm tasting it now, see about salt, more pepper if you need it. This one's just about right. We're ready for the meatballs. So I've let this come back up to temperature, to a simmer, and I've got about this much broth left. I may have to add it later. We'll just wait and see. But I want you to see all those lovely mushrooms, and you can't see the onions so much, but the flavor is there. And I'm going to add the meatballs, and as I said, I thawed these. I wouldn't put them in frozen. If you have to put them in frozen, just turn your heat down. Let them simmer a little while longer than you would with them thawed. With them thawed, you're going to let them simmer for about 15 minutes on medium-low heat. Then we'll check the thickness and add the rest of the broth if we need it. So it's been the 15 minutes. I'm going to check the consistency, and I think I want this just a little bit thinner. Now you don't have to make it any thinner. I'm going to add the rest of this broth. You know, when I said at the beginning, I probably should have started with a bigger pan. Grandma Velma's pan is a little bit smaller than a regular 10-inch skillet, and I'm coming right up to the edge, but I think we're okay here. And this looks just right to me. So I'm going to turn this off, plate it up, and then I'll show you what we've got. Now this is the gravy without the meatballs, and whether or not you're serving this at a fancy dinner with the tablecloth and the china and the silverware, or whether or not you're going to just put this together with some meatballs or some beef tips. This is a versatile sauce, and I really recommend you learn how to make it. And this is how we're having it tonight. Fred loves it with meatballs. If you had beef tips instead of meatballs and added half a cup of sour cream, you would have beef stroganoff. If you made it with chicken broth and added some chicken, peas, and carrots, this would be chicken on a biscuit. But tonight, it's meatballs and noodles. I'm going to give this a taste, and I'm going to show you how thick and rich this sauce, gravy, whatever you call it, is. See how it stands up to the noodles. You see it's coating the noodles. This is not just some liquid on your plate. This is a sauce or gravy. It doesn't matter. It's just yummy. Thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. I hope you try this, and if you already know how to do it, and so many of you already know how to do it, think about taking the time to teach this one to one of your children that's leaving for the Army or for college, or just to go out in their first apartment, in their first job. This is an easy to learn alternative to fast food, and they will feel so proud of themselves when they master this. See you tomorrow.